It's a real pleasure to introduce Nick Lobo. I first met Nick in October when I went to Miami as a writer in residence for the Miami Rail, and they introduced me to a bunch of interesting artists and curators and others in Miami, and Nick was among them. We had an amazing 4-hour conversation the first time we met, and I hope became fast friends. I really respect and admire his work and think he's one of the most interesting people I've met. I hope you, over the next hour or so, come to agree. Nick Lobo makes sculpture, installation, video, and performance, and focuses on the human body and the transformation of everyday materials through consumption and use. He lives and works in Miami. Nick is shown widely in the US, including exhibitions at the Pérez Art Museum, Miami, a show which I saw, which hopefully we'll see a little bit of, which is really great. Red Bull Studios in New York, the Marlboro Gallery in Chelsea, Martos Gallery, LA, the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, the De La Cruz Collection, which is in Miami, right?
It is.
Yeah. The Agency, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Santa Barbara, and the Orlando Museum of Contemporary Art. He's represented by Gallery Diet, which is an excellent gallery in Miami. He recently completed a residency at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in Arlington, Virginia, spooky place, and graduated with a BFA from Cooper Union in 2004. Please join me in welcoming Nicolas Lobo.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Can I just talk? Can everybody just hear me like this? Thanks, Mark. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks to everybody that had me by their studio today. It was really fun. I guess I'm just going to go over some of the projects over the last about 3.5 years. And then I guess Mark wanted me to talk a little bit about, I guess, my lifestyle in Miami, so we can do that after. And, open things up to whatever you guys want to talk about. This is the oldest project that I'm going to show tonight, and this is sort of a document about the process of it. I was invited to do a project at Florida Atlantic University, and I happened to be on residency in Arlington during that time. So a lot of the initial work with the project happened by email and over the telephone. And the person, Rod Falds, who ran the gallery there, was really, really on board with whatever I wanted to do. But the administration of the school was a little bit skeptical. It's not an art school, and they're a little bit apprehensive about what I was going to propose. So what I did is I proposed to block the main hallway of the building completely, with the understanding that it wasn't going to happen. And basically, over the course of 2 months and going back and forth with the Buildings and Grounds Committee and so on and so forth, we arrived at this shape. And then the preparatory staff of the gallery built the shape, and the exhibition designer of the gallery picked the color. And that was that. And so I thought, great, I came up with this, interesting shape through this agonizing process. And then something else happened, and people started moving through the space every day at particular intervals. So this shape is what's left over, or what they let me have, from a total sort of wall blocking the entire passage. And so the height, for example, is predicated on wheelchair accessibility to see this exit sign that you see in the background, and access to the stairs, and so on and so forth. So at this point, I thought that I was really excited about the shape, but what I was actually excited about was the way people's bodies move through this space, and how the demands of those people's bodies sort of created this shape. And so I really think of this as the beginning of the body of work that I'm currently involved in, which I think Mark summed up pretty well. Right after doing that, I was looking for new studio space, and I was talking to a bunch of different people, and they offered me this building, which is one of the first banks in Miami, actually. It's now completely boarded up and abandoned or disused. So in looking at this building, which was just impossible to use as a studio, I mean, it was too far gone. But it was filled with this kind of stash of this energy drink called Nexite. And I'd never heard of it before, but it came in these, beautiful blue glass bottles. And it was about 15 years old. The expiration date was sometime in 2001. And I said, I don't really want to use the building as a studio, but I'd really love to have this drink. And they're like, please. So, so there was 120,000 bottles of this stuff in the end. And we basically trucked it all out with forklifts. The building was completely boarded up with, well, not boarded up, but sealed up, sort of like a tomb, actually. It had been for 15 years. And I got a very special art handling company to take all that stuff out. We had a special forklift that had, there was no roof on it. It had been modified to be able to make it in and out of the building. This is actually the biggest door. There's another much smaller door that the forklift has to fit through. So anyway, we got a couple of tractor trailers full of this energy drink. And then I filled the gallery with it, making a floor. And what's interesting is, I think they're 12 packs. The 12 packs, have a very specific unit size and shape. But then the gallery has its own size and shape. And so what would have been a perfect grid was actually, I guess, disturbed is the word, by the columns and the little doorways and things like that. And it was very important to pack as much of this stuff into here as possible, because if it was a little loose, you wouldn't be able to stand on it. And so the show took place like this, and people were walking on the tops of these glass bottles, and interspersed in this grid, and also disturbing the grid, are these sculptures, and they're made by pouring gasoline on styrofoam and then coating them in Play-Doh, and then kind of just mushing my fingers into the Play-Doh. And then they're on these, terrazzo bases. And the blue sculptures that you see actually are colored with the energy drink, which is this kind of disgusting Windex blue. And so, this is kind of like maybe the first show that's really about the body, right? It's about this energy drink, and so like the interesting side story about the drink is that it was originally called Niagara, and it was marketed as Viagra for women. And then Pfizer sued the company. It's a Swedish company, or was a Swedish company. And they kind of folded and changed the name to Nexite, and then shipped out, I think, like 2 million bottles. And right away, sales just completely plummeted, and the company went out of business in like 3 months. And so there's probably other stashes of this stuff all over the world. Because it turns out it's really hard to get rid of. It was actually almost impossible. I had to get the ex-mayor of one of the cities to allow a trash place to take it. Nobody wanted it. There is not. I mean, it's just all marketing, I mean, as far as I can tell, it tasted like peach, I don't know, like flat peach soda. It has the only like ingredient that they admit to is special love herbs, whatever that means. Yeah, there's definitely, I don't think there's anything really aphrodisiac about it, but I think that's the case with a lot of energy drinks, although some of them have a little bit more in them, but this company in particular was very mysterious. I mean, because that's a bold claim, So this is a project, this is a kind of a temporary public project in a historic building downtown. And so basically the proposal was perfume clock. It's right in the middle of this incredibly low-end knockoff perfume district where you can buy all kinds of bootleg perfume for $1 a bottle. And I arranged with the stores selling this perfume to give me a lot of it. So if you look at the balconies, each balcony has a 55-gallon barrel full of a different kind of perfume. And they also sell these 6XL shirts at the perfume shops. So I just stretched one of those on top of each barrel. And then it's just a bunch of timers and pumps and hoses and stuff. And I basically kept it limited to celebrity perfume or imitation celebrity perfume. So this is J-Lo. This is Nicki Minaj. This is P. Diddy's perfume knockoff. And it all gets piped to this clock on the corner, and every hour on the hour, the whole intersection gets filled with, whatever celebrity smell of the day. It was a 7-day project. There was a different celebrity for each day. And so I think it's important to remember that, all anyone ever perceived of this was just the smell, right? I mean, I have all this documentation and I'm kind of explaining it, but it was just really this mysterious smell. And I think it's important for me to be able to tell the story of the project, outside of it. But I think it would have also been a mistake to try to explain all this stuff in the project experience of the moment. Anyway, so I think that this, what this has to do with the last project is it's this kind of, liquid that has to do with the body, and by changing the scale of it, you get to some different place, hopefully. This is part of the process of the Pérez Art Museum show that Mark mentioned. So I mean, the general idea behind this project was to turn a swimming pool into some kind of industrial machine. In this case, a concrete casting machine. So I had this mold made of a Versace ecstasy pill, and the back of it was a concrete casting mold. And so for about a month and a half, a couple of us were just hanging out in the pool casting concrete in the shallow end out of this ecstasy pill. And what's nice about it is that it was kind of referencing the ecstasy pill, but at the same time, it's kind of like a pool ornament, or this kind of like kitschy Miami culture thing. And then about halfway through, I started to get the idea of putting lunch in the mold as well. I put a pizza, shrimp, French fries, and what was nice about that is we had all these pool chemicals on hand, and the idea was to see could we use these pool chemicals in different ways? And so hydrochloric acid happens to dissolve organic matter really fast. It's also used in swimming pools to stabilize the pH. So we started just dumping lunch in the concrete and then washing it out with hydrochloric acid, and all of the organic material would go away. And then you'd have these like kind of fossils. This is like an installation detail. And you can see a couple of French fry holes there. There were like some really nice jumbo shrimp fossils also, which was, I think, more fossil-like. But you know, the pizza one didn't really work out, but better luck next time. And then so there was this issue where like the rings had to be bolted together, and you wanted a little bit of flexibility so that it wasn't too brittle. So we just put flip-flops behind the washers, and it gave it a little bit of sort of rubberiness. Here's a batch of rings that are by the pool they were cast in. It's kind of a kitschy but nice pool. I mean, it was a great place to work. And then this is a installation shot. Two formations of rings mirrored. I like that sandal a lot. Another thing they let me do, which was like completely unbelievable, is they also let me use the hydrochloric acid to etch the wall of the gallery. So the gallery was 6-sided cube of concrete, which is kind of the origin of the idea of using concrete. And you know, so not only does hydrochloric acid work really well on organic matter, but it also etches concrete. And these walls are super polished. And the original idea of the architects was that the Herzog and de Meuron was that the museum's walls would kind of hold a trace of every show that happened in there. The museum preparators aren't necessarily so happy about that all the time, but it was really nice of them to let me do that. And you can see this kind of like Greek etching, a Greek frieze. It's called a meander, and it's also used for the edges of swimming pools. And now, so now we're getting into the like latest project. This was a tough one. This wasn't that easy, and I'm still kind of a little bit worked over by it. The idea was to get fiberglass swimming pools and use them as casting pits for soap, a lot of soap. This is kind of an action shot from the studio. We had 3 swimming pools. They're called spa pools. They're not like small like jacuzzis, but they're not Olympic size either. And we had to figure out how to make a lot of soap, dump it in the pool, and then get it out. And we made about 10,000 pounds of soap. This is like a 55-gallon barrel full of soap setting up. So we had to protect things with plastic, and then we had this mechanism that we kind of figured out last minute to pull the stuff out. Because it's actually easy to get the soap in, but when it's time to pull it out, it's really difficult. Soap is really slippery and so on and so forth. Anyway, after we were done mixing the soap, we would just put the bucket down in the soap and then started making these kind of holes, which I thought were really good. And so each piece of soap kind of captures the curves and the kind of blobs and bows of the pool shape. And so that last piece that you saw being cast, you can see it's kind of in the foreground here, that pink thing, with the bucket pulled out and the PVC pipe pulled out. And then so the swimming pools that the stuff was cast in now becomes the plinth. So it gets flipped over. And there's 3 pools. You see 2 here. And then the installation, or like the difficulty in the installation, is kind of like figuring out how these things can fit back into the shape they came from in reverse. And it's not that easy. Like, in the end, the way that it all was displayed is it has a feeling of being difficult, I think, because the shapes don't want to go back to where they came from. So you're kind of negotiating this like reversed curve all the time. And it makes for some pretty awkward moments, which, in the end I like, but so that's the final like condition of display for that. And then so each soap had different additives. There was activated charcoal. There were like sexual attraction pheromones. There was bergamot oil. So different like aromatherapy things. I mean, there was some smell, or there is some smell. This show's actually still up a couple blocks from here. And in the back, you see this kind of glass window with red on it. And so we got this, like, the team that was working with me was like really helpful with finding these industrial connections. And they helped me track down this barrel of lipstick from a factory in New Jersey. So this kind of ties back to the perfume and to the energy drink and so on, like this change of scale. And this red was interesting because I ordered it to match the pools, but it came out a little bit different in that quantity. When you just look at a little dab, it appears to match, but then when you look at a huge blob of it, it doesn't. But then when it went back on the window, for the most part, it does kind of match the pool again. And the interesting thing about the red that they use in lipstick is it kind of deteriorates a lot when it's exposed to sunlight. So putting it on the window seemed to make a lot of sense. So that's actually only about, 20 gallons. I got to figure out what to do with the rest of the barrel. It's kind of another thing about it that's really nice that you can't get from the image is the smell. I mean, this stuff smells like pretty strongly. And I think that that's really important, Also the soap smells. And these kind of like body scents are very different in this quantity. Like when you smell lipstick, when you put it up to your mouth, it's one thing. When there's a whole room of it, the smell has a completely different character. And I think it's something it's an important part of it. It's funny, when these things got turned upside down in the metal structure, they start to look like the mold, that they came from. And it's also like really weird, but they just look like modernist sculpture, even though I kind of thought they were going to, but it was mostly the process that made them look like that. Just putting the bucket back down inside the piece to make the holes, and then the curves that came out of the swimming pools were very like, Henry Moore curves that were arrived at by a totally different process. I went to school here in the city, and most of my friends, were really interested in going to grad school right after they finished. And I kind of, I definitely like made a really hard choice at that point, and I think it's continued to affect me in probably a positive way. There was like this big like push by everybody else to like, stay in New York, make it in New York, get a gallery right away, et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of went the opposite way. So I actually took a year off and didn't do anything for like art related for a year to be sure that I wanted to do that. And then I realized that the first thing that I needed to do was figure out how to not have a day job as soon as possible. And so the best way to do that was to move back to Miami, where living was really cheap at the time, not so much anymore. And so that's what I did. And pretty quickly the window closed where I thought I would go to grad school. You know, I had the idea that maybe I'd leave the door open for it, but it became apparent that that wasn't what I needed to do. And what I did instead was buy a piece of land, and this is where I live in Miami. And it's actually within the city. You know, it's the last block of the city of Miami. And it's an old citrus farm, and it has its own well, and I set up solar panels for the electrical system, and you know, there's pineapples and bananas, sugar cane, a lot of greens and stuff. And so like I actually haven't had a day job, I think coming up on 9 years now, and not because I sell a whole lot of art either. Although that does happen from time to time. It's just more like kind of a contraction lifestyle where I need less. I haven't paid rent since, in 2008, I stopped paying real rent, and then I think I paid like $200 a month for various like provisional living situations to save up for the land. But you know, I think that I don't regret any of it. I think not having a day job is like should be priority number one. You know, for anyone that wants to kind of do this thing. You know, unless that's part of your plan. Go ahead.
Do you classify a day job as Monday through Friday, 9 to 5? Or?
I mean, that's open to interpretation. I would classify a day job. I mean, that kind of job is less and less across the board these days, I think. I mean, I would classify a day job as a job that has very little to nothing to do with what you really care about, and takes up, you know, the better part of your day or most of your time, whether it's even working remotely. I mean, I tried a bunch of things at first. You know, I thought, oh, well, you know, I can have a part-time remote job or, you know, whatever. I did, you know, web programming. I thought, yeah, I can just work from the laptop, make my money, and then turn it off. But it just never seemed to work that way, you know, no matter how flexible it was. And then it dawned on me pretty fast that, like, instead of trying to make more money from your work, you have to use less money so that you can make your work more. And that's really hard in the city, I know. You know, there is almost no options in this city to do that. Right.
What is the kind of work that you do that's not a day job, that's not art? Like, what fills in those gaps?
Oh, well, nothing now.
Oh, okay. So it is then from selling your art?
Yeah, but I have to sell a lot less of it because my situation is set up as such.
And your situation is that you bought land and then you don't pay an electric bill?
Yeah, I mean, I don't pay rent, I don't pay an electric bill, I don't pay, you know, my car is a 15-year-old car that I paid cash for, like everything's done. So I think it takes me like about $1,000 a month to pay for the studio rent. I have to rent my studio, unfortunately, which is like the huge defeat, but working on that. And then, of course, I tried not having a studio for a while, but it wasn't really like working out for me. And also less grocery bills because of growing food. But, you know, I mean, I don't know if this is really for everyone, but I don't know. Mark seems to think that it's one possible route. Is that right, Mark? I mean, Oh, you're not? Okay.
You know, so we talk off and on in different contexts about different routes you can take after grad school so that you can be what I sometimes refer to as a long-distance runner. You know, the goal, I think, is to be able to keep making art for as long as you want to. Hopefully, for most of us, that's the rest of our lives. And hard to figure out how to do that, especially if you have, like, you know, have to pay, say, $1,000 a month in student loan payments, plus maybe another $1,000 a month in rent, plus, you know, the $20 New York City sidewalk tax, which means every time you step out on the sidewalk, it seems like it costs another $20. You know, plus. And we talk a lot about, you know, so like the old school path was, well, you just go to your studio and pour your genius out onto, well, proverbially a canvas, right? And then some gallerist hears about your genius and then picks you up and sells all your work, and you never have to work again. And, you know, you just keep being a genius and going to drink at a bar at night. And that just doesn't work that often anymore. And so, like, we have this workshop called Artist as Culture Producer, in which we talk about kind of different entrepreneurial models. We have a panel next week with different graduates who have taken different paths to, you know, working in a way that relates to your artistic practice and is also, you know, supports your livelihood. But I just think, you know, you've chosen this other path of basically getting your costs down as low as possible so that you can do nothing but make art and take care of your kid and, you know, a few other things. But you don't have to hold down any kind of job. And it's not because you're, you know, I mean, you're represented by a gallery and you do sell some of what you make, but, you know, you don't have to, you know, make some of the difficult choices that others do. You've already made some difficult choices to set yourself up. And I just think that's an interesting possible model. Growing your own food, living off the grid, you know, on a cheap piece of land in a converted trailer that you fix up yourself, so you don't have like any utility bills, no mortgage, no rent, lower food bills, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I have been thinking a lot about that more lately because it's been a few years now that I've been in it, and like, well, you know, one of the things is this idea that like cultural production is the main kind of production that happens today. Everyone's making photographs. Everyone's sort of behaving like an artist, right, in the world. So like what can differentiate someone who thinks that their cultural production deserves to have all their time devoted to it, which is, I guess, what someone who identifies as an artist might say. And then for me, it was just like, well, you have to change your lifestyle, right, to be different. I mean, you know, does that make sense? Like, the lifestyle is what differentiates, or the sort of like underpinnings of how you go about your cultural production, like the mechanics of it. You know, and so this is like what I chose, you know. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, another path is like total dematerialization of practice, which is, I think, a legit path, but it's also problematic in other ways, you know.
I think there's a connection, though, between the way you thought about those life choices and the way you actually make your work and what you're interested in. We talked about your interest in economies of the human body and the kind of different systems of circulation and distribution that we exist in. I mean, in a way, I feel like there's a kind of, you know, living as form going on in your home.
Yeah, totally. But at the same time, like, you know, I mean, I feel like Andrea Zattel is doing a great job of it and making that like her work, where I didn't want to make my sort of, like, I was a little bit uncomfortable when you asked me to talk about the way I live, but I know it's important but at the same time, it's kind of like strange for me to put the inside out.
I'm not saying this is your art, but I guess I was also trying to draw you into talking about, for example, why soap, why lipstick, why perfume.
Right.
There's a bunch of backstory that you didn't really get into in talking about your work in terms of the things you're interested in and your that manifest themselves in your choices of materials and processes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think more than anything, I'm really interested in what it takes to maintain a human body and exist and take action, you know, and I think that all of those materials kind of feed into that, and sort of the economics of the human body and the economics of human bodies in a much bigger scale. I think that that's at the root of a lot of positive and negative things that are happening in the world today. The demands of the human body and the desires of the human body and the economic structures that are needed to support those things. And then so like, yeah, you know, my lifestyle is based on the idea of what's the minimum scenario that I can comfortably live in and not have to pay in economically all the time, right? Every month on a cycle. And that's, yeah, that you're right. It's the same kind of attitude, it's the same kind of stance that I bring to my work. I need to be outside of the economy to be able to like observe it or something. You know, when you're in it, the pressures are too great, and it's difficult to have any kind of perspective on what it takes to maintain, you know.
Scarlett?
Particularly when you're talking about like your living environment, I feel like your sort of model is like is sort of a very sustainable model in a way. You know, it's like what you're sort of talking about with like this sort of the economics and like this kind of strain. It's like this seems like a kind of sustainable way of living.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think that that's definitely an application of the word that's like absolutely correct. But I have to say that the flip side is I have a few like issues with that word itself and like its use. I'm not convinced that anything is actually sustainable, like in a literal sense. This is sustainable by necessity, but you know, some of the work that I do, it uses toxic ingredients, but you know, things like that. I mean, these swimming pools, these giant fiberglass things. So that kind of brings up an interesting point about the swimming pool project. Those pools are on loan, and then when the show is over, they go back to the factory and they get finished off, and then they go on and become swimming pools. You know, but I think that they're a very unsustainable thing, but I've borrowed them for a minute to sort of make a point about them, maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Hey, can you tell us about your relationship to the barrel, the 55
The 55-gallon barrel? Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not the only artist that's like a little bit fascinated with that right now, and I've actually stayed away from it more than I've wanted to because I don't want to get too like fetishized about it. I think that it's a very important unit in relation to the human body, 55 gallons. I mean, we think of it initially as like oil barrels, but oil is really not transported that way or sort of partitioned off that way. And we think about it in terms of chemicals, but like at the same time, I was living in like Ridgewood, Queens a few years ago, and you can go into like a corner store and pay, I think it's like $120 and they have barrels and you can fill the barrel with whatever you want and they'll send it to the Caribbean, for example. It's sort of like the next step down from the shipping container, which I think is now, the shipping container has definite associations with the human body's economy as well. You know, if you think of stowaways and you think of like food and so on and so forth. But I think the 55-gallon barrel is sort of like on the scale of an individual. And it also happens to be about as much liquid as one person can kind of manage without mechanical assistance. And so there's this like weird like one-to-one kind of body relationship. And I guess that's where those t-shirts came in and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that's like, what do you think about the 55-gallon barrel?
I've been thinking a lot about it lately. I got stuck in one this weekend. I was able to get in, but out on my own.
Was the lid sealed?
No, no, thank God. I did not end up in Jamaica. But yeah, I mean, I think I see them all around the hood, and I think about the idea of using them to send things home, and like what gets packed in them outside of industry.
Right.
But seeing you use them with liquids and kind of filling them with your own liquids is interesting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that way of repurposing. And I'm wondering, I mean, where did the lipstick just come in a barrel, or did you put it in a barrel?
No, that was the minimum order from the lipstick factory. Was 55 gallons. So like, yeah, and then, you know, it also, like, to me, the barrel kind of represents before the consumer and after the consumer. Like, when it's in a 55-gallon barrel that's new, it's before it's reached, like, the individual, right, the lipstick. And then when it's a used barrel, like, at a bodega in Queens that you can send somewhere, now it's after the consumer as well. It's been through a cycle already. So it's this kind of before and after container that's kind of interesting. And it definitely falls within this kind of idea of like hyper-generic objects, right? Things that don't even really have designers. You know, they're just these kind of like weird like empty blips floating around that resist destruction because of whatever reason, whether it's because they're made of plastic or, you know, and then they sort of flow in these like other circuits that are interesting circuits, I think, for sure. So, but like, how did you end up in the barrel?
How did I end up in? I got in it.
Oh, you got in it and then you
Yeah.
couldn't get out?
I bought one at the bodega and I was like, this looks like my size, and it was going in, but just not coming out. So,
Yeah.
yes, my whole body. Thank you. Here, Ron.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So, first I was surprised by the house because.
Which house? This house?
Yeah, like
Oh, okay.
your play or something, the place where you live, or because your work is there's so many like consumption and I don't know, these kind of products and excessive, and then this was a kind of a contrast. And then I'm thinking, like, where does it stand? If from one side it looks like it kind of taking a piss at consumption, but also kind of dealing with it in a serious way. And from the other side, maybe taking a piss a little bit at art and modernist art or something like that. Like, do I make myself clear? Is that a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I get it.
I guess where you stand with it, how do you see it, or something like that?
I mean, I guess I don't really, like, I don't feel like there's, like, sides to stand on. I just feel like I want to move through it. And Yeah, I mean, definitely taking the piss is important. You know, and at the same time, I mean, I don't know, like, we live in the world that we live in, and I'm trying to deal with it the way anyone else is trying to deal with it. I think, successes and failures, not only with my work, but also with the choices I make about my life. You know, even this like sort of like off the grid within the city has taught me a lot about, like, you know, by thinking that you're doing something that's like less impactful in a negative way, sometimes you end up being more wasteful in other ways and things like that. So, you know, I mean, I'm also a little bit perverse, you know what I mean? Like, I don't believe in the artist as someone who has an obligation to do good at all times, right? So I think it would be disingenuous for me to build a practice around the idea of the way I live my life, if that makes some sense. The practice is a little bit outside of my life at the same time. It's sometimes reflective and less prescriptive. I don't know, does that kind of answer the question a little?
Are you using outdoor landscapes to generate an artificial yet temporary location, like using nature to like create something that's temporary and artificial?
I mean, no, I wouldn't describe my work that way. I am interested in the idea of like ecology, like in terms, like as a placeholder for nature, and like what ecology is and what it isn't. And so, you know, I like to see very far down the chain of things that I do. Like, for example, the soap, it's made with vegetable oil, which is, you know, comes from soybeans and corn and so on and so forth. And within the research for that particular project, I did a lot of research down the line, you know, where does this oil come from? What are the processes used to make it? You know, in Florida, for example, we have these like sugarcane plants that are completely self-contained. So they use the sugarcane byproducts or the sugar manufacturing byproducts to power themselves. So they don't need electrical hookups. They don't need, you know, and this is kind of an example of something that is sustainable technology, right? They're not using power from a coal factory and so on. But it's also tremendously damaging to the environment. So there's really not an easy answer that I can see to that question. I mean, every time you pull the chain, another link comes up, and you just never find the end, if that makes any kind of sense. So I think I'm seeing everything as one thing. Everything is sort of part of the same blob if you pull the chain enough. And that's a little bit what the work is about. It's about pulling that chain a little bit more than it's usually pulled, right? You look down the line and you see, oh, these swimming pools come from here and they look like this, and then, you know, we sidetrack them for a minute and then put them back into the line. The soap is the same thing. We grab some things, the lipstick, we grab some things, we pull it out of its normal flow and pull that chain a few more links, and then we put it back. So everything's kind of like overlapping and relayering, yeah.
How did you like go back in time with how you got interested in this, what you just described? You know, these things that, you know, taking things in and out of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using that word. You're talking about this chain and taking it out temporarily and adding it back.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in that in the beginning?
I think I got interested in that through doing it inadvertently. I was making work, and I mean, you know, maybe 7 years ago, I was sort of like starting to make work as an individual outside of school, right? So I started making some stuff, like what I thought I should or wanted to make, and then I started, I knew that I wanted to make some things that were like, in a sense, you know, physical, right? I wanted to think physically. And then when you start thinking physically, you start pulling on that chain regardless. And it was a matter of like trial and error until I could kind of see that chain, and then reading about it. I mean, I'm definitely not the first person to see that chain. So, or the last. But yeah, so I started kind of seeing it that way, right? It's kind of just like a way of seeing this kind of system. Also, Miami is like a place that's not really an industrial place for the most part. I mean, it's entirely based around like, you know, the history of tourism and leisure and so on. So there's very little industrial resources there. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's very scarce. And so I had to work a lot harder to get access to the things I wanted. And then in the beginning, it was kind of like, oh, well, I want to make this thing, and I want to make it out of metal, and I need this kind of metal because that's what I have in mind. And that metal is not available, so you've got to go find some other metal. And what metal is available, and why is it available? And how much does it cost more to get the other metal because it has to be shipped down, and where is that factory at, and so on and so forth. And I had to do a lot more of that work than someone in New York might have to do, because you can get almost anything you want here right away. And so it kind of came out of sort of figuring out the resources that were around me and how to use them. And then I started seeing things like that a lot more. Yeah. And after every setback or everything, you know, that would happen, I'd have to think about it. And then that's where those thoughts come from.
Hi. Where in Miami is your place where you live?
It's right near something called the Little River. Are you familiar with Miami?
Yeah. I don't know where Little River is, but is it south or is it?
It's north. It's like my block. Like this is literally, like, it's literally on the city of Miami line. Like I can throw a rock over the city of Miami line from where I live. And it's all the way north. It's the northern boundary. Not the county of Dade County, but the line of the city of Miami. And it's the Little River. There's two natural rivers in Miami. There's all kinds of canals, right? Because the Army Corps of Engineers carved everything out to drain the swamp. But there's also two natural rivers, and it's the Miami River, which is really big. And I wish I had a house on that. But then further north, there's the Little River. And it's actually, interestingly enough, the first recorded settlement by Europeans in North America is on that, not this exact site, but like in that little bend of the river. It was French Huguenots who came and sort of, well, we don't know too much about it, but they coexisted / took over a village on the river. It was kind of a trading village, so it didn't really belong to any one tribe, but it was kind of a village. Well, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked.
No, it's interesting. I mean, but the reason I was asking because you have neighbors it's not like way out in Homestead or somewhere that's just more rural, right?
Yeah.
You have neighbors. How much land is actually there?
You mean how much land do I own, or?
Yeah. Or what was the old citrus farm, for example?
Well, like the whole neighborhood was a citrus farm that was on the train line, and so the Florida East Coast Railway, which would bring all the citrus to the Northeast during the winter, that was one of the main pickup spots. It's just north of Lemon City, which is like a citrus packing place. And so actually we bought the land from the daughter of the owner of the citrus farm, who was actually born there. And they had kept this one plot. Over the years, the family had like chopped off different sections, and then they built like blocks and houses and so on. And then this was the last unbuilt block, or the last unbuilt plot. And the owner's mother's house is directly next to it. And they kept that as like their like sort of memory of what it once was.
So is this then a plot that returned to farming in contrast to what's around you?
It was never built.
It was never built.
Yeah, it's still like it was never built. It's been an orchard since, you know.
But one of the few areas like that around you now?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
So that's the reason I was asking those questions. I was wondering like what, you know, how big of a farm this was in terms of thinking about sustainability, you know, and whether for yourself or like how much stuff do you grow? Does it generate income? Is that another sort of like, you know, part of the lifestyle? Because I think part of the what is such a fantasy to imagine, especially from like New York, is first of all like property ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that gives, you know, a sense of autonomy that's hard to imagine for most people here. So land, property, being in control of that, you know, or just solving that problem is, you know, a fantasy of its own, but then also having sort of land that you grow on and that you can sort of eat from is another step in sort of this fantasy of sustainability, or, you know, sustainable living anyway. And which is fascinating, but I was just wondering how much, you know, this actually works that way, or, you know, in your life, or how much of it is sort of, you know, or yeah, how much of it works that way or not, I guess, is the question.
You mean works in the way of like a fantasy of sustainability?
No.
Or?
Well, like, you know, you were talking about how where you lived also, like you eat in part off of, you know, what you grow there, for example. But do you grow enough to where that generates another kind of income, or?
Not on this land, no.
Okay.
I mean, it's a quarter of an acre, which is really skimpy, you know, for that. But it's a little bit more like of a lab than it is like a fully like functional farm. It's not really a farm per se. It's just more like a different way to live within a city. I mean, that's the way I see it. Yeah, like, so my girlfriend is a farmer. That's what she does. And she farms within the city, but not here. So, and I leave that to her because it's really hard work, and I'm already busy with what I'm working on. You know, I mean, we grow stuff here together and like, you know, harvest things on this land together, but she works really, really hard elsewhere. She has a 4-acre plot further north that functions that way, where it provides a living, and she eats, you know, we eat from it as well. But I don't really see this as that like complete sustainability like example. It's just more like if everyone lived this way, I think cities would probably be better off. I do have a fantasy of building a house on here, but it's almost impossible to do it the way I want to do it, and I'm not interested in doing it the way I would be forced to do it. The zoning code in the city of Miami is one of the most difficult to negotiate in the country, and you can basically only build like one of these awful houses that you can imagine, right? It's 20 feet back from the road. It has 7 feet on either side of the plot or it's a percentage. But basically they want to make sure you have enough space to fit lots of cars on your property, and it has to be set way back, and it can only be a certain height, and it has to fill a certain percentage of the property, because property tax is calculated based on square footage. And so if you have a property of X size, they want to be able to at least collect X amount of tax on it. So you're basically forced to build an awful house.
So with a trailer, you don't have to pay any property tax?
Yeah,
or-
it's, you know, questionable. There's a land tax, but there's no house like tax. That's another tax.